Hello, hello everybody.
Hello everyone.
Today we are speak about situation in aviation market. Now we have a very big crisis, and maybe Simonas can speak about situation in European and aviation market.
Well, I think I can summarize in short the things which are all around us. I mean, most of the flights all around the world are grounded. It all started in Asia back in February mainly, but now the most hit region is actually Europe, followed by North America, where we see still ongoing cuts of flights every week. When taking into consideration Europe, this week we see only about 10% of all the scheduled flights operating compared to normal levels at the time of the year. We still, cannot be sure is it the bottom or not yet, but it looks like it is. So it's grounding of unprecedented level, especially in Europe. We start looking, and I think the goal of this webinar is to look what are possible outcomes out of this crisis, and I think we can start looking at the data we are getting from China market, where the crisis hit first, and we see first strong signs of recovery there. And we can count that it takes kind of around 4 months, from the beginning to the point where the first signs of recovery appears. We still don't know will it be a case in Europe as well or not, because how this crisis is managed is different. But I think something we can think of for the future of this crisis.
Volodymyr, you are living in Singapore. What situation in Singapore at now?
Well, in Singapore, I should say it's very, very quiet. Singapore Airlines has grounded most of its aircraft, and I think that some rescue flights are still being operated, bringing Singaporeans back home and potentially bringing foreign nationals out of Singapore. But there is virtually no commercial passenger traffic going on. Of course, cargo traffic is still kind of doing all right. Elsewhere in the region, actually, since Simonas has mentioned China, well, currently traffic in China is recovering, but in terms of flight movements, we are still about 40% down compared to the regular level. In Japan, it seems a bit better, so around a third down from the regular sort of traffic level. Australia is significantly down now, I think close to the, well, not as much as in Europe, because there is still kind of domestic market going on, but about 70% last time I saw, if I remember it correctly. But in ASEAN countries in general, well, domestic flights are still being operated. In Singapore, there is no domestic market for it, so there is no traffic. Quite a lot of military flights, though, of course, because the Singapore Air Force is making good use of the empty skies to train its pilots.
Artūras, what about Baltic states? What about Eastern Europe market?
Well, basically the same as colleagues mentioned before. Most of the airplanes are grounded. Some cargo flights or some governmental flights are happening, and that's it. And everybody is waiting, preparing their business for the comeback. And basically that's it. Nothing new.
Nothing new, but if you look in this crisis, it's like 98 or September 11, or it's a new crisis for our market.
Well, each crisis is a different but we can say that aviation industry is like prepared quite well for different crises. But this one is, of course, is different and will have an impact in the future passenger behavior. How the passenger will battle with his own threat to fly with the airplane, to sit next to the another hundreds of passengers and so on and so on. And of course, that will give an impact to the airline directly, but of course that will lead to all the chain of activities and supporting business around the airline businesses.
I can just support what Artūras just said. I think what is really unknown at the current point, one of the things is that we don't know what the confidence of the people will be to use air travel again. And I think this recovery may last for quite a long time, just because people need to take some time to the confidence to return to fly, especially abroad. And I think other important aspect is we don't know yet how the economy will look like after all these limitations will end. So we don't know if the GDP in Europe will be -10% or -5%. So and we all know that aviation is really like a mirror which reflects to all the things what's happening in the economy. And I think those two items combined, the confidence and the economy, will be the main aspects which will results how fast this crisis will end.
What about help for airlines? What about help from government for airlines in other countries?
Well, in Singapore, actually, the government is stepping into with financial assistance for Singapore Airlines, and we see the U.S. government doing the same. Then in Europe also, governments are helping in different ways, and not only to the airlines actually, but also to airports and air navigation service providers. So the aviation is going to get sort of assistance throughout the value chain, right? And well, that was to be expected, of course. The other question is what would be the conditions that governments may attach to this aid, right? Will the airlines be forced to, let's say, retain some routes which they would otherwise not want to retain, or will they not be able to introduce some kind of practices that they may want to introduce? Will they be forced to, for instance, drop baggage fees? Or I don't know, I'm just kind of making things up, but you can think of some conditions that might be attached to this aid, which might not be very sort of good for competition for the market after the recovery. And also, if I may add to what Simonas and Arturas have said on the crisis in general, well, I would say that this is probably the worst thing that can happen to the aviation industry in the peacetime. On one hand, well, you can think about this as either 9/11 or SARS really on steroids, which kind of happens all over the world. And I lived actually in the United States in 2001, and I remember basically the same kind of questions being asked on about whether or not people will be afraid to fly after the events of 9/11. And if you remember, there was also a sort of smaller sized, of course, small sized recession in the US economy at the same time. And well, we have recovered, as we obviously know, we all know the history. And but I do agree that it is going to take us a couple of years at least for aviation to kind of get back to the sustainable, to the growth paths. And okay, maybe will take aviation 25 years rather than 20 years to double. So, but at this time, at least, I'm confident that we will get back, but it's going to take time.
Okay. What do you think? Which airlines have more good chance after crisis, low costers or traditional airlines?
Well, in my opinion, we don't have so many private legacy airlines in the market, because most of the traditional airlines which are still in the market are owned by the governments. And in my opinion, well, looking from the point, I mean, it all depends on the government. Every government, even small country government, will have a chance to put additional money into the company, and the companies may survive. And what we see so far all around the world, and it's the same happening in United States or in Europe, that the government support for the airlines is really happening in unprecedented levels. So even the airlines which were really in a bad shape before this crisis, even in good times, now just got additional money injections directly from the governments to survive for some time. We see at the same time strong low-cost airlines which came to this crisis with quite a lot of cash. We heard about Ryanair or Wizz Air or other big players in Europe having enough cash to survive for a year without revenues or so. So general thinking would be that this crisis should end up with more consolidation and with some bankruptcies. But with the level of support received from the governments, we see now a month passed already, but we don't hear any bankruptcies, at least from mid-size or larger airlines. We hear some bad stories from some regional airlines from Sweden, but
Simonas?
How the picture will look like after.
Okay. You speak about subsidiaries, about help from government for airlines, but it's legal or illegal in the European Union?
Well, I think what we see now is that European Union has way weaker voice than it had before. So some countries just don't care what European Union says. Some countries got approvals from European Union, but it's just happening. And yeah, I don't think that European Union will start taking actions against the governments at the current crisis. I don't think it will happen.
Yeah, but actually, European. Yeah, sorry, carry on.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Arturas. Yeah,
just to add what Simonas said, basically, European Commission let the injections to do to the government during that period of the crisis. But of course, Simonas also said one thing, and it catch my mind, that the injection will live for the airlines for some time. Simonas said only for some time it will help them, and probably that's the truth. And comparing with the other airlines, for example, low cost, who have a better startup position comparing with the legacies, and especially who are always willing to get some help from their government. So that's, I think, the main point.
Well, my answer to this question would be that large airlines seems to be kind of better positioned to survive, for larger airlines. The legacy carriers, because they will get help from their government, and the low-cost carriers, because they have arrived to this crisis holding some cash reserves. Well, liquidity is really the name of the game now, and the airlines are trying to ensure that they have some liquidity, etc., etc. And one concern that I have is that some of the airlines, which should, in all honesty, have been allowed to fail, will be saved, right? I'm not going to name names, but we will see that happening, and it's unfortunate, but that's going to happen.
What do you think? How long airlines can stop it? It's now 1 month, 1 month more, 2 months, half year. How long? Stop it and go bankrupt.
Well, according to IATA, the last thing I heard from their chief economist is that a median airline has about 2-3 months worth of cash reserves, right? So that's kind of the horizon we are looking at, well, assuming no or limited government help when we start seeing bankruptcies. That's my opinion.
What do you think? I think when we can fly from Europe to Singapore?
Well, that's a good question. Well, technically, I think that Emirates, they are now kind of adding more flights to their schedule. So potentially you could kind of cook up a schedule via an option via Dubai, but there is a catch that you will not be allowed to enter Singapore unless you are a Singapore resident, either a citizen or a long-term pass holder like myself. So it's one thing whether the flights are available, it's the other thing whether you are actually going to be allowed into the country. So it will. Well, I'm hoping that and around July we may be able to see some return of semi-normal situation, so to speak, in the sense that you will be able to actually enter the country and kind of and also get a flight there. I'm not sure kind of to what extent this is a reflection of anything, but just to let you know, for instance, my employer, they have canceled all official trips until end of June. So they basically cannot go on a business trip, even if otherwise you would be allowed to enter that other country and return to Singapore. My employer will not sort of support it.
Simonas, what you prognose? How much how much passenger traffic will be in this year? If
I think it's too early to say, because we don't know what will be the length, the total length of limitations. I mean, we are now close to 0 level, so if this 0 level will last for 3 months, so we have full quarter with 0, so even if it's 100% of the traffic, all other 3 quarters, so it's already -1/3 of traffic is gone. So it's difficult to predict because we don't know when this government limitations will be lifted. But even taking in consideration that it will be lifted in a month or 2 months, I still think that, let's say, if the limitations are lifted in June or July, still we will see that in the 4th quarter of this year we will have like -30 or -40% of the traffic, just because of the economy and of fear of going abroad, because of company policies not to go anywhere, and because of leisure market will be dead for some time, because people are not willing to spend their holidays and taking a risk that they will be locked somewhere in the foreign country.
Artūras, what do you think about this prognosis?
Well, it's of course, at this stage, I think we can just guess, and that's it. As well, probably Simonas mentioned and everybody else. So it will depend, but of course, if you want to have my figure, Oleksandr, I can give you. In my opinion, it will drop comparing with 2019, half of all value. So that's the figure, just for like guess from the heaven. And let's hope, of course, everybody is hoping that it will be not so bad, but well, in the end, I think that anyway, we will get more stronger after that, and each crisis teach us a lot of things.
Volodymyr, your opinion?
Well, based on sort of what I see from China, Japan, and other countries where kind of there is some movement, so to speak. Well, I would say that by the end of the year, at least if you're looking at the fourth quarter, we will probably we are probably looking at a quarter to a third drop in traffic, kind of on the global scale, which means that 2020 compared to 2019, well, probably about 40–50% less. So I would agree with, in general, with in the ballpark with the previous estimates. And well, 2021, okay, well, that's kind of the biggest unknown is how economies are going to respond to all the fiscal monetary stimulus, which will be basically pumped into it. So now the governments, the central banks will be injecting a lot of cash into the economies to see to bring the activity back. So if the economies respond to stimulus, and if sort of the either vaccine is found or the epidemic is kind of dies down in another way, you know that we might get the second wave in the autumn, according to some estimates, etc. So in the optimistic scenario, I would say that 2021 would still be about 15–20% less than 2019. And 2022 is when I expect us to be back to 2019 level.
What do you think about price of ticket in this autumn? Will be cheaper, or will be cheaper, or will be more expensive than last year?
Well, in my opinion, it's short term. It a lot will depend on the competition and what the competition will look like. But in the longer term, I still believe that this market will go forward with consolidation, especially in Europe, because we still have quite a lot of airlines. And when we saw what happened in the United States, that towards the years, the market was more and more consolidated. So I do believe that that the prices should go up in mid-term just because of consolidation. The other aspect, I believe, what is important and it will affect in the ticket prices, maybe not in short term, but in long term, what will be the measures airlines and the airports and all the industry will need to take back the passengers' confidence. I mean, I read yesterday that Wizz Air offered that they suggest that middle seats should be blocked in all Airbus 320 and in all the narrow body aircrafts, and they are ready to fly with middle seats blocked. So that means that costs are the same, but you have 1/3 less seats in the aircraft. So that's definitely means that that the prices will go up. I mean, if other measures will be taken, that every passenger needs to have temperature checked in the airport before the boarding or before the check-in. I mean, it's again a cost which will in the longer term will need to be paid by the person who purchased the ticket. So yeah, so we'll see.
Okay. Denis here, but Denis not can speak. Problem with video. Maybe. Okay. If we speak about another business in airport, about handling, about MRO, about all aviation support, which situation now in this market?
Well, yeah, if I could, probably all different market has a different aspect and effect on due to the aircrafts parked in the aprons. But of course, it's also a lot of depends from the airlines who have their own 145s or they are outsourcing it. So it's also sometimes good chance to do some maintenance tasks and to prepare for the restart of the operations. Well, so that's about the maintenance part. All the rest, ground handlers are obviously affected, and now we are standing at 0% here in Lithuania, and just having some handling activities on some cargo and the government flights. The rest of the activities of the businesses in the airport or around the airports are stopped completely. Duty-free shops, so you can imagine there is no other option. And of course, they will be affected for a longer term as well, because as we talked before, the passenger flow will not come back as it was before the crisis. And let's hope that we will have, let's say, 10% in the first month. But what it would mean to the huge duty-free shops with thousands of square meters. And well, the same goes to other activities, other shops, hotels, everything, tourism. So yeah, it's a big effect.
Denis, you are here?
Yeah, I'm here.
Denis Antonyuk, ex-head of Civil Aviation Authority Ukraine, ex-vice president of Ukrainian International Airlines, are now businessman in the tourist sector. And Arturas said about tourism in Baltics. What about the aviation and tourism sector in Ukraine now?
Everything is fully stopped and already about 3 or even maybe 4 weeks, and only question of some extra repatriation flight and nothing more. And it looks like it will not be open till at least midsummer. So Borispol only airport opened for flights, rest is totally closed. Borispol is only loaded for 5 to 10%, and 3/4 of staff already gone. So they are now on reduced payment, but airport doesn't know what to do with the staff and with all expenses after probably 1 month or slightly more than 1 month. The rest of airport totally shut down. All airlines, majority is not operating at all. Join up and the PS operating some repatriation flights, but like majority of them are also stopped. And the majority of airlines now on it's paid leave, but it's reduced payment leaves. So I don't think that something happened here earlier than midsummer.
What you prognose? How long can be stopped? How long this situation can be in Ukraine?
Officially, government already announced that from May it will start some relief in quarantine regime. So hopefully from May or like second week of May, we will get some easement of restrictions. It's only question that it's announced from the very beginning that easing of regime will touch some shops, some commercial activities here in Ukraine, but it will not touch any aviation and border control activities. Means it will not be opened earlier than June, and currently nobody knows what will be with the border regime for midsummer. Means if government promising to lift up some restriction for commercial and for industrial, nobody even promised something for tourism and for aviation for a moment.
Okay, and I asked another guys, and will ask you about your global prognosis. First question: which airlines have better chance, low cost or traditional airlines?
I would say there are 3 levels of question. Very first, HIP or list of airlines which definitely will survive. I think it's the national carriers who will be supported by government, like 100%. They will paid by local authorities. It's guys like Lufthansa, like KLM, like Air France, even this strange airline which is not truly business airline but rather social project airline like Alitalia will survive. Second point, it's a secondary airline in European countries and leisure airlines in these countries. Like majority of them will die. I think 10 to 12 airline of major airlines will survive, like KLM, like Air France, like Lufthansa with the satellites. 10 to 20 guys like Thomas Cook, like Air Europe, like maybe even Virgin, which is only assets of them now it's slots, and if they decide or not decide what to do with slots, probably they will be next victim. Norwegian as a second airline after SAS also can disappear, and like they will be very first candidate for closing. And third area, it's a low cost who has a huge money in the pocket, who has a huge access to the money in the like in different monetary funds. And I think if funds decide that hey guys, these guys always brought us quite good money, so let's extend this policy. So in this case, they will have biggest chance to survive. So among three these number one majors will survive 100%. I even haven't any doubts that government will let Lufthansa go. Definitely majority of second airlines of the big countries will die. Especially I have concerns about leisure airlines. And about big low costs, I'm not saying about second bank of low cost, but like a majority of majors like Southwest, like Air Asia, like whatever, Ryanair and then Wizz Air, they will 95-99% will survive. Questions only of marginal airlines and niche airlines. Even lot in this concern, in this connection, can be considered as a niche airline. So for this airline, it is a question marks. For example, about lot, about who else, like Tarom, regarding all the Vietnamese, Thai, Chinese secondary. Here's a question mark. What local authorities will do with them? If they have enough money, they will survive. If no, it will be like a quite long list of who will die. In US, it is all the guys like Alaska, like who has a quite niche position and who has not real money for a moment in the pocket.
Volodymyr, what situation with Airasia and Leon and another low-cost carrier in your region now?
Well, I mean, so far, I would say that so far so good. I have not heard literally any news, which is, I guess, a situation that we can say that no news is a good news. And for now, they seem to have a decent cash position. Of course, you can ask the question as to whether or not the governments will step in with those airlines, especially given that due to the regulatory framework, Air Asia, Lion Air, and sort of other Jetstar and other carriers, they actually have to keep subsidiaries in pretty much every country they operate, which kind of makes up for a bit cumbersome structure and potentially a bit costlier one than what otherwise would be. And I mean, you could potentially see like smaller players in this market segment going away, going eventually. But I am pretty confident about Air Asia. Well, Lion Air maybe for a different reason. So it's Indonesia being Indonesia, and Lion Air owners being kind of connected to the government, so they might get some favors from them. smaller, but I would totally agree with Denis. He gave the kind of view that I pretty much subscribe to, that yes, we will see some smaller carriers going in this region as well. So for instance, in Hong Kong, okay, we have Cathay Pacific and we have Hong Kong Airlines, and my guess is that Hong Kong Airlines will probably not survive. I mean, it almost went out of business earlier last year, and so I do not expect them to come out alive, to come out of this crisis alive, really. And in Malaysia, well, maybe Malindo Air is kind of also in a shaky position, etc. But in general, I think that what we have said before about which airlines are going to survive kind of applies to Southeast Asia equally well.
Understand, thank you. Any question? Maybe you have any replics? Maybe in this time all. Thank you very much. Today, Simonas Bartkus, CH-aviation, Volodymyr Bilotkach, Singaporean Technological Institute, Artūras Stankevičius, Lithuanian Airlines Civil Airlines Association President, and Denis Antonyuk from Kyiv. And thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.